And good morning. It is time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. And now your host, Mike Hewitt.
Thank you, Brian Thomas, and good morning, everybody. In the station with me is Jim Riley riding shotgun, and our normal wall of separation is Ludwig von Wiedendorsky, commonly known as Matt Wiedenhoff, and Pax is riding the real shotgun. Listen, first, before I get going with the show, I wanted to say welcome to GR. Today we're adding 1230 WTKG onto our lineup, and I'm very, very excited about having an ongoing relationship with the folks of Grand Rapids. So welcome. With that, let's dive into the show. On the line with us this morning, we've got former Congressman and former chair of the U.S. House Permanent Select Committee, Pete Hoekstra. Congressman Hoekstra, welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show.
Mike, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Listen, it feels, I'm looking across the globe, and I've got an article in front of me. Let me start with that. It says, ISIS goes global, 75 attacks in 20 countries have killed 1,280 people. When I just watch sound bites on any of the mainstream media, and including Fox, the cable lineup, Fox or CNN, etc., it feels like there's 7 or 8 deaths here and 12 there and 8 there. But, Pete, this is a war.
It really is. We just completed a study at the Investigative Project on Terrorism where I'm spending a lot of time lately. And, in around 2010, the number was around 3,000 people per year, 3,300 people per year were losing their lives as a result of radical jihadist Islamic attacks. By 2014, 2015, that number had grown close to 28 to 29,000 people annually. It is a significant number, and I expect the pace in 2016 to equal, if not significantly exceed, what we've seen in 2014 and 2015.
I got to tell you, Pete, I genuinely didn't get the level that it is. And just for folks to imagine this morning doing show prep, I wanted to print an article that was written by CNN. In fact, the title of it is ISIS Goes Global. And I thought, why is my printer taking so long to loop up? It's 66 pages. It feels like the political correctness, both within the media and within our administration, have blindfolded us. Like we're not seeing what's really going on. And with that in mind, that tells me that we're not actually fighting folks that are fighting us.
That's right. This threat continues to grow. Excuse me. Europe, the West, the United States, we all continue to really not confront the threat. You take a look at the attacks in Paris and Brussels. You take a look at what happened over the weekend in Pakistan. You take a look at what is consistently happening across Africa. And then you take a look at what the U.S. government recently said in the last couple of days, which is to military families need to move out of parts of Turkey because parts of Turkey are not safe. And it is, it's a real mess out there that hopefully one of these days the West will confront it and we will tackle it and we will identify it for what it is.
Wow. What do you think we should be doing right now in Washington, D.C.? What's the proper path that we should be on?
Well, the proper path is we should recognize that it is a radical jihadist Islamic force that we face. Whether it's 10% of the Islamic community or the Muslim community, or whether it's 15 or whatever the percentage is, it's a significant number. We need to recognize that this is a threat from people who use religion to motivate their followers, to recruit their followers, and those types of things. We need to identify the threat if we intend to actually defeat it. We need the Muslim community to stand up and to confront this threat and this cancer that is within their religion. Then we need to take the fight with our allies to their safe havens. right now, Mike, they have safe havens. Think about it. They've got a caliphate, a safe haven that they're kind of running as a country in large areas of Iraq and Syria. They have a safe haven, a caliphate in Libya. And they're using these safe havens so that they can plan, prepare, and train people to attack Europe, to destabilize the Middle East, to expand their influence in Africa, and to expand their influence in parts of Asia. And ultimately, they will have a more concerted effort to attack us here in the United States. Right now, I think America is a target of opportunity. If they see an opportunity, they'll take it. But eventually, they're going to do the same things in the U.S. that they're doing in Europe, which is a concentrated strategy to destabilize our European allies and to significantly increase the level of violence and terror in Europe.
I'm looking at a map again that was produced by CNN, and it identifies, I believe it's going from June of 14 through current, or through last week, and it's highlighting 7 different terrorist attacks within the confines of North America in that period of time. And I paused to think about this for a moment, because I think part of what you said is exactly what most folks are thinking, and that is that this is somewhere else. And the reality of it is that it's not somewhere else anymore. It's here. And they're using social media, and in fact, they're even using some of our political elements to get to people and then slowly convert them over. We're treading some very dangerous water here.
We really are. Take a look at what's happened in Europe. The Brussels attack. There are reports that the individuals involved in the attacks in Brussels were taking a look at perhaps attacking their nuclear facilities. It may be only a matter of time before we see ISIS or another radical jihadist group get their hands on some radioactive nuclear material, some chemical weapons, biological weapons, before they use that kind of a weapon in Europe or in the United States. We know that these weapons are available in the Middle East. There are reports that Bashar Assad has used them. There are reports that ISIS has used them in Iraq. And this is no longer speculation, quote unquote, as to whether weapons of mass destruction actually exist in that part of the world. There are reports that they have been used, and those have been verified by independent agencies. And we don't know exactly what the level and the quantities of the materials are that are available there, but there'd be enough there to have multiple attacks in other places of the world.
So in that regard, you're talking about things like chemical weaponry, even frankly some mustard gases left over from forever ago.
Forever ago, and there's always been reports that Bashar Assad had the capability to produce some of those kinds of chemical weapons. And, it's very possible that ISIS may have the capability to produce some of these in, very rudimentary but effective ways.
Pete, what can you tell us? And I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but Boko Haram. When I'm reading the articles now, there looks like a competition between these various rogue elements and I'm just looking at numbers of deaths, but this is one that the media is not grabbing onto, that I think they're having a seriously negative impact on the tranquility of the globe, frankly.
Well, Boko Haram, number one, remember, a lot of these groups, there may be some competition to them, but a number of these groups have now pledged allegiance to ISIS. And the other thing we have to remember is that these groups have more in common than what separates them. They're working towards the same goals of, destroying the West, our types of civilization, destroying the nation-state of Israel, and things along those lines. What you also have, Boko Haram, they are very active in Africa, primarily focused in the region around Nigeria. Remember, they were the group that, I think 16, 18 months ago captured hundreds of girls, in Nigeria, and they've been carrying out attacks in Nigeria. Now, they've lost some territory recently, but they've still been effective in carrying out a reign of terror in that part of the world. And so, it's Boko Haram there, it's Al-Shabaab somewhere else, it's ISIS somewhere else, it's Al-Qaeda in another part, and they all share very much in common in terms of a radical ideology.
I'm reading that ISIS itself, or ISIS alone, has a $2 billion budget for their military. That's fairly significant for they say caliphate because they control land, but for, frankly, a radical terrorist group. That's unimaginable to me.
Well, it's actually the size and the scope of their budget is unimaginable. The other thing that is unimaginable is think about it: a terrorist group that holds a geographic area that's about the size of Great Britain.
Right.
We claim as victories small progress in rolling back their geographic territories, but they still control the city of Mosul, which I believe is a city that has over 1 million people in it. They control that type of a geographic area. For a terrorist organization to basically function quasi, they're not a fully functioning nation state, but to have some of the elements of a nation state and to physically control that amount of geography is kind of startling.
Yeah, it is startling. It really is. It's actually fearsome that these folks are able to do what they're doing. What's even more fearsome is that they're selling products, oil specifically, that's funding it, and it's just kind of shocking to me that the various countries of the world are looking the other way with the source of where they're getting their oil from. We're funding our nightmare.
Well, we're funding our nightmare, and the thing is, how does a rogue element like ISIS, how do they actually produce oil, and how come the United States and Europe can't stop it? You would think that with a few strategically located missiles and smart bombs and those types of things, we could take out their oil production and that they would lose a source of revenue. The other thing is, and you were alluding to this, who in the world is buying this oil? How are we letting that oil into the world market? Because you're absolutely right. These are the resources that then are used to destroy us. Right.
Are there any one of the presidential candidates, frankly, on either side of the aisle, that you believe, with your foundation knowledge, that has us on the right path, or that is proposing the right path?
Well, I'm very concerned about Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Much of what we see today in the growth of ISIS, the formation of the caliphates, the creation or the resulting failed states, a lot of that happened on her watch and under her policies, along with President Obama. So I'm not going there. On the Republican side, I think that number one, John Kasich, Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump all recognize to a much greater extent the threat that we face as a country from ISIS. I think that John Kasich probably has the most coherent strategy to deal with that. John's got a tremendous amount of background in that area. He served in Congress, so he's very comfortable with foreign affairs. And I am a John Kasich supporter, and full transparency there. I think Ted Cruz clearly understands the problem. I think that he probably literally doesn't mean what he says when he says we're going to carpet bomb the Middle East to take care of ISIS.
Right.
That's not how you're going to defeat a terrorist organization. But I think he's using that hopefully metaphorically to just say, I'm going to take a very, very strong approach and firm approach and aggressive approach to eliminating the threat of ISIS, recognizing that he'll have to employ a lot of different tactics and not employ carpet bombing, but that he'll be very aggressive in his push against ISIS.
Right.
And so, I think all three of them recognize that. I think John Kasich probably on day one is the most prepared to actually implement strategies and tactics that would confront them immediately.
Now, you've met all three of them, have you, Pete?
I've never met Donald Trump.
Okay.
Okay. Obviously, I served with John Kasich. I know
Sure.
John very, very well.
Right.
I've had the opportunity to meet with Ted Cruz and talk with him on a number of different occasions. Ted's a very bright guy. And so, so I'm familiar with John and I'm familiar with Ted.
Right. Well, Pete, I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to segue to some commercials. But listen, Pete Hoekstra, thank you very, very much for joining us this morning.
Always good to be with you. Thanks, Mike, and great success on your program.
I appreciate you. And as we get a little further down here, I'm going to try to call on you again if you don't mind.
Not a problem. We'll always look forward to it.
Very nice.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Folks, we'll be right back.
RenegadeRiver.com is new and used firearms, all priced to sell, plus ammo, reloading supplies, optics, clothing, lasers, and yes, tactical gear. RenegadeRiver.com, family owned right here in Michigan, because you deserve it.
And we are returning to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com.
Hey, thank you very much, Brian. Again, I'm still excited. I want to share one last time. Welcome to the folks in Grand Rapids. You're listening to the Mike Hewitt Show. And before I get going, let me reintroduce the folks in the room. I've got Jim Riley, shotgun, Ludwig von Wiedendorsky, as I often call Matt Wiedenhoff, Pax, and of course Brian Thomas is keeping us where we should be at. And I am Mike Hewitt. On the line with us is Miles Bauer. Over the course of the show for the last several months, I think, at least, I've talked about an ongoing text dialogue I've had with a lifelong friend of mine, actually, about our differences regarding the presidential candidates. And so it seemed like a fun segment to get Miles on with us. So with that, Miles Bauer, welcome to the Mike Hewitt Show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes, it's very good to have you on. But listen, you're a Trumpster, is that right?
That is indeed correct.
Now listen, I gotta have a little fun with it, okay? If I read the media would have me believe that a Trump supporter is a poorly educated person living in a trailer somewhere. And as I recall, that's not you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that the media is trying to sell to everybody because, I mean, it's more than the establishment that's kind of anti-Trump.
Yep.
And I think that the media goes right along with the establishment. I mean, as you know, I've got 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree, and I think that it's been demonstrated with some of the demographics when they go back to actually analyze the vote that Trump really doesn't have a demographic that he falls into other than his problems with females.
Right.
He pretty much cuts across the entire demographic board, which is unusual for a classic Republican candidate.
Only because he takes on a number of different different political strains of thinking. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, as you and I have exchanged text, Trump really isn't a policy guy like Cruz is. Trump is more of a symbol for the frustration and the anger that the electorate feels towards the establishment.
One of the differences you and I have had, Miles, frankly, is the word establishment, because I'm fairly involved in the Republican Party, and I have to tell you, not the vast bulk, all of them are elected by party members and grassroots. And so I say that because when I look at establishment, the term establishment, I think of a very small handful of people with their checkbooks out. And listen, that doesn't dilute the negativity that they bring to it. So I don't want anybody to misunderstand that I'm defending them or taking a role there. But I know a lot of the elected folks in the state of Michigan, several congressmen, and we may not be in lockstep agreement on a lot of things, because as the show is built, I tend to be a very conservative, Jeffersonian-leaning Republican. So I'm certainly not in lockstep with anybody, but I've never met 2 people that agree on on all the topics. So I push back on that term a little bit, because I think it's a media-generated term designed to divide us, frankly.
So let me put some clarity around that. When I think of establishment, I don't think of grassroots folks.
Right.
I think more of the Washington, New York corridor of the elite ruling class, the highly educated, the people who live inside the Beltway, or the people who live in academia.
So like a senator that's been there forever and he's willing to cut deals all day long. That kind of person is an establishment to you.
Well, so and I'm not so much against cutting deals, but when you just fully capitulate an entire philosophy, that's where it gets frustrating. And when you do that for decades, that's where it gets even more frustrating. Hence, they as in my use of the term establishment, I think they actually created the Trump movement, not necessarily Donald Trump himself.
I can certainly see that. The capitulation thing is probably the key. There certainly seems to be. Let me give you an example. In 2010 here in Michigan, and I'm going to guess it was the same way in Illinois, I was fairly involved in 2010. We had a whole new host of candidates, both on a state and federal level, that made the circuit to Tea parties and to GOP meeting groups, into grassroots in general, and promised a whole bunch of stuff that they were going to do when they got there. And frankly, when they got there, some of them kept their word, and maybe even most of them did, but enough didn't. Enough joined with opposition that you got to go, wait a minute, what did we do all that for? When I say we, the folks like myself that went out and delivered palm cards and went door to door and did the work to make it so these folks could win, to help them spread their message. And then suddenly we see that maybe we didn't do so good.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think that the Tea Party itself was one of the symptoms where the Republican committee never knew what was going on. I think in hindsight, they had a perfectly good warning shot to tell them, hey, something's going sideways here back in 2010 when the Tea Party arose, that they could have easily avoided the Trump movement that we're seeing now in 2016. I
agree with that. I remember Trent Lott laughing at the Tea Party. He said, that's all right, we'll co-opt them, no big deal. But when I say that, I also reflect back, and it goes to your point, Miles, that in 2010, back to that time I was talking about, I remember sitting at 6 a.m. in a volunteer campaign meeting here on the lakeshore in Michigan, where it was standing room only volunteers at 6 a.m., I say again. And they were all Tea Party people. When you did a head count, everyone in the room, save 3 or 4, were Tea Party people. And it seems to me what a tremendous lost opportunity that was traded away. That's how I see it. And you're right. Maybe it was a warning shot.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, and you and I are old enough. We remember 68. We remember 72. I mean, some of the frustration for me, at least, kind of goes back. Definitely, when you think about 76, and you think about how Ronaldus Magnus was there, and Gerald Ford, who probably wasn't up to your and I's political leanings.
Not so much.
And then when you think about, 1980, which was really a seminal moment for you and I, because Ronaldus Magnus comes to the fore. And what does the Republican Party do? They bring John Anderson up from my home state,
right,
to run against him. I think the school of thought that thinks that the Republican Party does not like their conservative base, I think that is absolutely dead on. I think it's been shown time and time again. And this is going all the way back to the 80s.
See, now for me though, Miles, I've always looked at it a little bit different than the them or us. I've looked at it more as at least a 3-legged chair, if not more. But you've got the Christian right, the libertarians, and to your point, the establishment that I've always identified as Rockefeller Republicans. And I think throughout the history of the GOP that there's always been competition of at least those 3, who gets to lead and who gets to make the decisions. I don't think this election or any other election, including 1980, that really is what I think impassioned both you and I to become active. I don't think any of that's ever going to change the dynamic that what makes up the GOP are at least those three competing factions. Am I wrong in that?
So I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you on point. The only thing I guess I would point out is that I don't know in your and I's life we've ever seen the vast difference between the ruling class and the people like you and I out here in, unwashed country or flyover country. I think that this is probably the biggest difference that I've ever seen in my life, or that I've been aware of in my life, between where the ruling class, lives and eats and breathes, and where you and I live and eat and breathe. And I think that's the key difference. I agree with your point. It's always been a struggle. But I think that we've always kind of all been on the same page. We all kind of struggled the same way. I can't say that this year, and maybe that's my Trump bias. I think that it's the difference is so vast now that it is creating strange things like the Trump movement.
There's always the element of who gets to share the blame, whether it's the establishment or, as I define them, the few people with big checkbooks, because inevitably money is the lifeblood of politics. And I say that, folks, let me add a little insert here. For a candidate to do a simple, even a local state house candidate to do a single mailing to deliver his or her message to his hopeful constituency is $8,000 or $9,000. And if you're a local person running for state house, that's a lot of dough. Trust me, I've been down this path, and it hurt. And I say that even on the presidential level, for these people to be out spending $100 million is unimaginable. It takes a lot of dough, and so that puts those very few people with big money into real power play positions. But the counterbalance, to me, should be what our founders called for, and that's a virtuous and informed electorate. And, we've all seen the classic person on the street interviews where they don't have a clue who the Secretary of State is or who the Vice President is, much less what those persons do. And to me, there is a disconnect, but it comes from the electorate. I mean, when we talk about primary turnout, 20% primary turnout, and we're all clapping with excitement. Wow, the turnout was really big. And I'm thinking 20%. Our country's on a pivotal, one of the most pivotal positions it's been at in decades at least, and we got a big 20% that cared. So 8 out of every 10 persons you passed, that's going to be okay. Let somebody else decide. I think that's the real problem, Miles.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm sure you're aware of some of the astronomical numbers that Jeb Bush spent for each one of the votes he got.
Right. I saw, we did the math on the show. It was comical. It really was.
Yeah, I mean, and that just kind of shows you, I mean, again, pardon my use of the word establishment, but I mean, there's the establishment thinking, we have all this money and
right.
we have all these donors, and we can bring them in, and yet that somehow this year didn't work out like it did in previous years. And just as a side note, I think this is kind of where our progressive friends kind of miss it on Citizens United. And, they think that was a corruption of the Supreme Court. Well, I think Jeb Bush kind of stands as an example of why Citizens United is not the issue that our progressive friends think it is.
Agreed. Tell me this in our little bit of time left, Miles. You and I have bantered back and forth the idea that they're going to drop in a new candidate or do a switcheroo at the convention. What's going to happen with the Trump supporters if all of a sudden we have, new candidate Acme, John Acme, that becomes the presumptive the nominee?
Yeah, I think this is. I'm hearing this more and more that if somebody doesn't make 1237, then it's a clean slate, and it's as if the primaries never happened.
Right.
If that is an absolute corruption, I don't know what is. But I'm hearing more and more, if somebody doesn't make 1237, then it's a clean slate. And basically the committee gets to come in and announce whomever they want. And it doesn't necessarily include Cruz, and it doesn't necessarily include Trump.
Now there are rules in place, though, that says that the first ballot has to be cast as those people have pledged. But I will tell you, watching it on a local caucus level, all three campaigns in Michigan, at least, are very active in making sure that the national delegates they elect are absolutely loyal to their candidate. So if you're a Trump person and you're running to be a national delegate at one of the caucuses coming up on April 8th, at least in Michigan, the Trump campaign, as an example, same with Cruz, same with Kasich, are very aggressive to make sure that you're not switchable or that your vote's not for sale in the second round. So it's going to be a fascinating thing, but at the same time, we're risking both the GOP and, in my view, the union, our union of states. I think we've got a lot at stake on this one.
Yeah, and I agree. And the thing that makes me nervous, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there going to be a meeting coming up in April where they're going to set the rules for the convention?
I don't understand that, but I will tell you that I've got a meeting coming up that's a teleconference that I'm going to get a closer view of that. I can tell you that there is always, for instance, in the congressional district that I chair, every election there is a rules and procedures committee put together, and again, they're put together from a pool of elected, not necessarily elected, but they're grassroots people. They're just regular people that are the ones that get together and try to make up the rules. I'm not aware of anything that's significantly changing other than I see the chatter on social media. I'm not seeing that from within the party. But I am hearing the same things you are, and that is that if they don't make the hump, then they're going to try to parachute somebody in. But what do you say about the theory, or I see people talking on even in general media now about the idea of a Trump-Cruz coming together and making a deal to block whoever the establishment is?
I would certainly hope that Trump and Cruz could come together to just turn this all off. Because to your earlier point, I think this would be the end of me following the Republican Party. If they do actually come in, turn this off, and they, in effect, invalidate what occurred in the primaries, they're basically telling us it's all about us, the establishment. It has nothing to do with you out there in flyover country. So I absolutely agree with you that I hope Trump and Cruz, yes, they have to throw the mud now because it's the primaries and, we got to let the dust settle.
On that note, lately, Miles, it feels like they've both equally. I don't know if it's the chicken and the egg, so I don't want to get into that debate, folks, but it feels like they've both went too far with the mudslinging, that is.
As you and I both know, the history of politics in the United States, going all the way back to the founding country, has always been a brutal, nasty, nasty fight. And it's been far nastier than anything that occurred this year.
You know what I giggle about a little bit, because I hear from folks on social media, Facebook and Twitter, etc., about how obnoxious this has become. And then those same folks go about beating their fellow opponents in the same manner. I'm going, wow, I just watched you on a different thread somewhere saying we need to end this, and now you're out just absolutely demonizing anybody that disagrees with you. Yeah, Jim.
Let me just jump in here. The one thing, there's a significant difference between demonizing your opponent and demonizing those supporters of your opponent. And I think that, as Miles had suggested, that if in fact Donald Trump in particular, but I think it's the same across the board, but if Donald Trump is not the nominee, a lot of those Donald Trump supporters at this point are going to remember how they were portrayed by the supporters and by the candidates that we, and I'm a mild Trump supporter, but that we are stupid, we are ill-informed, we are uneducated, we live in podunk USA.
I like it there.
And you may enjoy that, and I certainly love living here, but I'll tell you this, going out and denigrating people whose votes you need well in advance of an election is a very, very poor long-term strategy.
Yeah, listen, I agree with that, Jim, but I think it goes from all sides. The Kasich supporters are being vitriol. The Trump supporters are extraordinarily passionate, as are the Cruz supporters.
Are the Trump supporters denigrating the supporters of the other candidates? They are not.
Oh yeah,
I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, they really are.
Well,
I don't agree.
It's a
with
bad
you.
idea, no matter who does it.
Listen, I don't agree with you. First off, I agree it's a bad idea, but I think it's an equal portion for all sides, and because folks get very, very passionate in it, and I want them to be. Don't misunderstand me, but we can't say that the campaigns have gotten ugly while we're being ugly ourselves. That's the point I'm trying to make. Let me ask you this, Miles, before we run out of time. If Cruz won legitimately, if the next handful is I think he'd have to win more than 80%, but let's just suppose for a moment he did. If he were the legitimate nominee going into the convention, would you, the Trump supporter, be able to support him?
I would have to think long and hard about that. And the reason why I say that is because I still don't trust Washington. Cruz has the right ideas, and I'm not going to dispute that, but I don't trust Mitch McConnell. Okay, I don't trust the Speaker of the House. They've already capitulated on the last budget.
Right.
So, you could pretty much parachute a basset hound into the White House, and you're still going to get the same product.
Sure. That goes back to what we were joking about this past week when Jeb Bush endorsed Cruz. Was going to stop that. Don't do that again, and don't tell anybody. Okay, because of exactly that kind of reasoning. Listen, Miles, I've got to let you go, but thank you very much for joining us. And as we go forward in this race, let's get you back on.
All righty. Sounds good. Just one other thing.
Please.
I know you're running out of time. The same issues we're seeing on the right are the same issues that we're also experiencing on the left. I point to Bernie Sanders.
Amen.
This is an issue across the board. It has nothing to do with right or left. It has to do with the United States of America.
Listen, Miles, I think you are absolutely spot on with that. There's both sides of the aisle have had enough of the way the United States has been governed. That much we are in 100% agreement on. Miles, thank you very much. And folks, we'll be right back with the Enigma Report.
This is the Mike Hewitt Show on News Talk 1090 WKBZ and West Michigan's Talk 1230 WTKG.
Renegade River, guns and ammo, and so much more. Old-fashioned service with surprisingly low prices. On M104 at the top of the new 231 bypass in Utica. Or find us at renegaderiver.com, because you deserve it.
And we are back to the third segment of the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by renegaderiver.com. And Mike, I still have to come up. We gotta find a theme for this third segment, and I still have to go on. I'm gonna do a little searching around, and I have to find the ultimate theme for what is now happening, the Enigma Report.
Look at the
I love it.
For Apocalypse Now. It's
there
in
you
there.
go.
It's in there.
Listen, today's Enigma Report, we've got a kind of short one because I ran over with Miles, which was more than worth the trade. It was good to have him on. But listen, this Enigma Report, for me, in fact, I subtitled it, Where is My Melting Pot Gone? Did someone steal the melting pot? And what I'm getting with that, as I look at the social unrest here in America specifically, but probably the world, but America, and let me just say Western culture, along the path in my lifetime, I'm 55 years old now, and along the path, we've traded the melting pot. When I was back in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, they were teaching the melting pot in school. That's what they taught. And the concept of it was, in fact, by the way, folks, it goes back as far as the 1780s. The concept that you came to America to be an American and that you wanted to join with Americans, raise your children as American, and yes, bring your special culture with you and add it to, which is why when you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu, if you start Googling all the items, you'll find that our American menu is from around the world. And it's because everyone got to bring something and contribute on the path to becoming an American and to being an American. Now, the other side of the coin on this is multiculturalism. And multiculturalism, by the way, sounds fine, I guess it does. It's a nice, warm, fuzzy word that means a lot, and if you want to have some fun, look it up on Wikipedia. And while you're there, look up melting pot. And then you ask which one of these is working best. But when I look at the last 25 years, and I'm not going to entirely hang this on President Obama's hook, I don't blame it on him, although he has certainly fostered it and grown it. But multiculturalism, by definition, divides us. And I don't know how anyone can debate Abe Lincoln when he said, a house divided cannot stand. And so when I'm looking at us and saying, if we're all in our own little enclaves, that's a word you don't hear a lot in America, an enclave. We don't hear that because that's not how we've ever identified ourselves. And in fact, it is not that you're erasing who you've been or what your bloodline is. We hear, I mean, that's why you got DNA.com and all those organizations on television and on the internet advertising to retrace your roots and all of that. Listen, I applaud that, but I really like being an American. And if I can't put my head inside someone else's thought process, but if I had gone through all of the work to become a legal immigrant from wherever I came from and got here and found we have a culture that says, don't be American, be whatever you were wherever you came from, I think I'd go, what? Why did I just spend all that dough and risk all of the dangers in many cases that I risked to get here, only to be told that I'm not going to be an American. I'm going to be whatever. The concept of multiculturalism, it defies common sense. It defies human nature. It defies anything that says unity. Listen, I like the word unity. I like to say that we're all going to have some common goals about making America successful. And by the way, helping to make each other successful, which means get government out of the way and give us some opportunity back. That's how I see it. Guys, am I off in the ditch on this?
No. Well, I think I told you last week, Fritz, my mom's friend, came from the Netherlands.
I can hardly understand him.
Yeah.
Say that again, Fritz.
Oh, yeah. Somehow Siri on your phone understands him, though. I don't get that.
Yep.
But he came from the Netherlands, and whenever the Netherlands are playing in soccer or they're speed skating in the Olympics...
He still watches.
No. No? It's actually astonishing. I'm like, hey, Fritz, the Dutch are playing World Cup. They're in the finals. He goes, so? Where's the Americans?
Yeah, see?
I'm like, what? You're from the Netherlands.
He said, I came here to be an American.
Yeah, and then he always says to us, why do they keep doing this stuff? I left the Netherlands to leave this stuff.
But when you look at Brussels and you look at Paris and you look at all of the folks where we're seeing terrorist attacks, we're seeing cultural unrest, and by the way, folks, here in the United States where we're seeing cultural unrest, the lion's share of it can be hung on the hook of the concepts of division that are pushed by multiculturalism. I fear for our future when we have a government and a general culture. In fact, if you get a government job, by the way, if you just become somebody at Veterans Administration or somebody at the post office, somebody in any kind of government job, you are absolutely dipped in multiculturalism.
They put you through e-trainings and other types of trainings on multiculturalism in the workplace now.
And but especially in the workplace where it's being funded, whether directly or indirectly, for instance, higher education and education in general, these things are scary. It's like saying, folks, let's get together and divide. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how anybody can look at that and say that this spells long-term solvency for our country. It just doesn't, and we've got so many examples of how it's failing us, failing Germany, failing Belgium. It is a failed concept, and yet our government, through the use of our own money, our tax dollars they took, they're still advocating it. They're still pushing it.
I don't think it's just the government. If you go into a store now, things aren't just in English anymore. They're in English and Spanish.
But listen,
and then I was telling you last night in my classes, my students look at me astonished when I go, I believe in American exceptionalism. We're the best. We're the greatest. And whoa, you know, no. We are.
Help me understand what's the pushback to that. By the way, folks, we've talked about American exceptionalism, and I believe it is absolutely, my personal belief, it's absolutely enshrined in our First Amendment. I absolutely believe that. That's one of the things that very few, if any, countries anywhere else in the world has. And the further we deviate from it, the more young folks like you're describing they're becoming detached from that one thing that makes us exceptional.
You got to understand what drives this, and what drives this is political power. The whole concept of multiculturalism didn't come out of thin air. It came out of people understanding that when we get immigrants within our country, those immigrants, if we start giving them social services, will give significant benefit to, in particular, one political party. The benefits are to that party, number one, they will have new people who soon will be able to vote who are getting free things and are thankful for getting free things. And number two, the people who are hired, the various social service people and others, to give away those free things are also very thankful. And in many cases are getting their jobs through patronage and connections with the Democrat Party. So there's a very logical reason for a political party to get involved in this. They are, number one, seen as giving away wonderful things. They're big-hearted. Certainly anyone who stands tall and says this is a bad idea is immediately demonized as a heartless bad guy.
What they can do is they can divide their message. So I can say to this group what this group wants to hear, that group what that group wants to hear. Real brief because we're down to 60 seconds. Here's what I found looking in a 1944 Popular Science magazine. It defined conservatism as a group of people that didn't want to do anything for the first time. Folks, find us on Twitter at Talk Mike Hewitt. Find us on Facebook at /The Mike Hewitt Show. And, of course, themikehewittShow.com. Thank you very, very much for dialing in, and I look forward to us having a conversation again next Wednesday at 9 a.m. In the meantime, by the way, if you've got a message or something you'd like us to do, or if you'd like to be a sponsor on The Growing Show, send me a message directly at mike@themikehewittShow.com. And beyond that, I can't wait to talk to you folks again. Next week we have another line of a couple exciting guests. We'll talk to you then, folks. Have a great, great, great week. Thank you very much.